Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session. We're talking about the supernatural, which is of interest to so many of us here. And that is something that is beyond the realms of science, of the natural order of the world. It's inexplicable, could perhaps be dictated by spirits, ghosts, deities, magic. And we have here with us today three writers who deal with it in different ways. Supernatural in fiction could be fantasy, like dragons, dragon riders, people from outer space, people we don't know anything about, phenomena we can't explain or understand, as in Indra's The Dragon, Last Dragoners of Bobazar. Okay, because mine are horribly marked. And, or it could be about, the supernatural could be about the bizarre, almost bordering on horror, fueled by a really spine-chilling sense of autosuggestion. That is, it sounds scary, but it's really interesting. That is Himanjali Shankar's book. Or it could be about resident-friendly ghosts, totally non-menacing, not at all out to get you, people we live with in the family. People, I say people. You know, time-honored tradition in families, we coexisted with ghosts, as we see in Hemangini, Dutt Majumder's book, The Scratch and Sniff Chronicles, and of course, Himanjali's book is The Burnings. Three writers of the supernatural, treating it completely differently, who are going to be treated absolutely with radically different reactions. Let's look at Indra first. Indra, you started, your debut novel was Devourers, and after that, you've started with this, you've come to this novella, The Last Dragoners of Bobazar. I wanted to ask you, this is a story about it's a layered story, first of all, a kind of growing up weird. So what exactly did you set out to achieve with this? What are the reactions you were looking for? And how difficult was it to move to a novella format from a full-fledged novel?
So, can everyone hear me? I never really start with a plan. This novella came about from a dream, which was pristine in my memory when I woke up. And that dream is described very precisely in the first chapter. That's the image I began with of a grandmother showing me a tree with these kind of seed pods, and then unwrapping a seed pod, and I realized in the dream that it was a dragon, a little embryo of a dragon kind of hanging from this tree. And I remember being astonished and just thinking, I can't believe that dragons exist. You know, this is incredible. This is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And then I woke up, and I remember having this immense sense of melancholy from realizing that it wasn't real. So I wrote down that image, and that's where I started. And then I just kind of, as I often do, I just kind of expanded from there and saw where it would take me. But it turned into a book when this very small press in the US, Subterranean Press, they asked me to submit a novella to them, which is why it ended up being a novella, because I was contractually obligated to write one. I could have expanded this into a novel, I think, pretty easily by the time I was getting into the rhythm of things. So that is a little bit disappointing to me, actually, that it ended up having to be short. But yeah, that's how it wasn't difficult to transition from novel to novella, because it's not like I'm writing books every other day. Like writing anything is immensely difficult for me. It's very challenging, especially with the state of the world right now. It's very distracting. But yeah, I mean, writing a novella is very similar to writing a novel. You just kind of keep at it, and then you kind of winnow it down or expand it. It's very messy for me. Like I don't really have a. But yeah, that answers two of your questions. There was another aspect.
What was the reaction you were looking for from
The
your
reaction,
audience?
again, I don't like to be prescriptive about how people interpret my work or read it. I just want people to read it and enjoy it and take away whatever they feel. But in dealing with the coming of age story in Kolkata, kind of focusing on someone who is kind of really into Western art and media, kind of growing up with all these Western books. I tried to, because that's what happened in my childhood. Like a lot of what I grew up with and was inspired by was Western art and media. And later on, as you grow older, you come to realize the kind of implications of that, the post-colonial and imperialistic implications of how we consume art and the Anglophone sphere that we exist in as upper middle class, English-educated Indians. But I wanted to tackle it from the point of view of someone who has no awareness of that. Is still a child for most of the book. Rue does grow up to be an adult in the book. But yeah, I wanted to kind of capture that in-between feeling of growing up in India and also kind of being so engaged with art from outside India, while also kind of describing Kolkata as a very vibrant and multicultural place. And of course, there's the last aspect of I also wanted to portray a coming of age of someone who is queer and doesn't know it. And I think is an experience that is very, very common in India.
There is a gender fluidity.
I think there's a lot of people who have no idea that they're queer or are deeply closeted.
Yeah.
So Rue is again, Rue doesn't have the language for it, doesn't know the terms that would come up later, mostly again through Western discourse. But Rue is what I would describe as genderqueer or non-binary or whatever. And so, but again, he doesn't know that when he's throughout the duration of the book. But I wanted to portray that,
And that comes across very clearly. Himanjali, you have horror palpable right through your book. And it seldom explains the mysteries. The rather terrifying mysteries are seldom explained. Now, what was your intention? Did you intend to engender this feeling of spine-chilling mysteriousness that was unsettling, inexplicable, and menacing? And before you answer that, I want to read something. It kind of goes a little, I find it difficult to reconcile that, Himanjali, with this. She writes here, Himanjali likes birthday cakes with candles, the rhythm of waves breaking on a shore, the first glimpse of a mountain peak on long car journeys with a dog settled on her lap. You have to read this to understand why I read that out. Really? I'm really surprised, but tell us.
Oh, yeah, can you hear me? Yes. So, no, I'm not, I'm very surprised at my bio being read out, and these are things I do like. I'm not, I have to talk to you about this as to why it's surprising. To me, it is who I am. It is part of who I am. And I guess what I'm writing is also, yeah, what I'm writing is, of course, it's a different world that I'm entering when I'm writing. And it's especially in this book, which is different from earlier books which I've written. It came from a more space of enjoying horror myself, being a fan of horror fiction. And I wrote this actually during COVID. And I think everyone would agree that those were times that were really conducive to a sort of, all of us were feeling a sense of disorientation, claustrophobia, all of that. So, and at that time, it was also, in a way, a little random that I decided to write this because actually what I wanted to do was a retelling of I have always wanted to retell a classic. I mean, pick up a classic, and that's something that I thought I would do a little later in my career, in my writing career. because I've always enjoyed, say, like even a movie like a Maqbool or a Haider, which are retellings of Shakespeare. Or, of course, Jane Austen has been retold so often. So I didn't know what I wanted to retell, but it was during COVID. I remember my daughter had left this collection of Edgar Allan Poe on the table. And it is something, I mean, I've loved Poe as a younger person, and I just was picking it up after, I think, 20 years. And I read The House of Usher. And I just felt like, why don't I try retelling this? And that's how this story started, really. And retelling, of course, when you're retelling, you're putting it in. So I'm taking a story which is 300 years old, but I'm trying to give it a context that's in the present. It's in my moment, in my time. So I set it in a hill station, unnamed hill station. And I think this writing, particularly during COVID, so there's that sense of isolation. And Edgar Allan Poe's books also have that psychological suspense more than, I mean, like, it's a lot of things being inexplicable, as you said. And so in my head, I could explain all of those if I wanted to, in an like academically, intellectually. But I did, in the writing, want to leave it slightly open-ended for the reader to also be able to interpret.
In fact, that's why I said there are 3 completely different styles, and each will have a huge number of takers. So yours is about auto-suggestion, not always giving explanations, leaving that bit of menacing, terrifying. You know, it works for that genre. It works perfectly.
That's what it's more, I would say, no, more than supernatural, it's paranormal, because it's sort of sitting at the boundary of the known world but it's not, it's slightly eludes the analytical mind, perhaps, slightly outside the boundaries of reason, but not quite. It does, so it's not about, of course, supernatural, which would be magic, or not that, but it is something, there are so many things, mysteries, which we can't exactly understand. So it falls in that twilight sort of space.
Thank you. Okay, we come to Hemangini. Now, you've treated your subject matter in the Scratch and Sniff Chronicles with this wonderful tongue-in-cheek irreverence. And you've juxtaposed contemporary skepticism with this old-fashioned belief in ghosts. I mean, most Bengali families, at least, really believe that ghosts were some things that we have to live with, and we coexist quite peacefully with. In fact, the narrator is a ghost. So what made you do this? Is this something you wanted to do purposely to keep it light? Or does this reflect your beliefs, what you are?
Yes. Thank you so much for that question. And I know it's a little later in the session, but a big hello to everyone. Thank you for attending towards the end of the day. So happy to be here. So it's definitely, I think my book is reflective. I always like to use this phrase. It's sort of reflective of the mess inside my mind. I'd like to go out here and say I always had a plan that it would be a certain way. It wasn't that way. I wanted to write, my favorite influences have always been golden age crime fiction. And that's, as a debut novelist, that's sort of where I started off, is what are my favorite things? And much like Himanjali, crime fiction and horror, these were my happy places, always growing up. And so what I wanted to do really was to write something that blended the two, and also created this space. So as Oindrilla very rightly pointed out, I wanted, because they were happy spaces for me, I wanted every experience, even if it was supposed to be horror, even if it is horrific things happening, I wanted hand-holding. I wanted there to be a situation where the suspense builds up, someone's really scared, and then some people may love this, some people may not. Then there's a wisecrack, there's a breaking of the tension, because that's my favorite style. And so I thought the nicest way to do this was to, kind of include this narrator who herself is, without giving too much away, she's, of course, a very important member of the family. And I might as well come out and say it. She's the mother of one of the lead characters. And I just felt that she's, growing up in this household with this really quirky family. How can her mother not be a part of this? And if I look back at female protagonists in my life, they are quirky. They have terrible senses of humor. They're not afraid of insult comedy, if I might say so. So I wanted the narrator to have that tone, that very irreverent tone of, a judgmental elder. It could be a pishi, it could be a mashi, it could be your mother, who's commenting on your life as you go through it.
And I think that's wonderful because it sort of counterbalances whatever you build up, the suspense. You wanted to marry the two genres, as you said, suspense, thriller, and supernatural. And it does that beautifully. So it comes in at the right time, gives you a laugh, makes it light, but you still have that air of expectancy. What is going to happen? Okay, Indro, that in Rue's story, there is marginalization and prejudices that you see are inherent there. And I also wonder, when you've talked about the Chinese, you've taken them as a community, made them a vital point here, set it in Chinatown. Is that also something to do with the, not marginalization, but maybe with the suspicion with which we treat with the Indian Chinese community sometimes, regrettably?
Absolutely. I wrote the book during COVID as well, during the height of the pandemic. And that was the time during which there was this repugnant racism coming out where people were blaming the Chinese and boycotting Chinese restaurants in Kolkata. So that was definitely a background element throughout the writing of the book. And the book is about a family of refugees, essentially, from another reality. So they are diaspora, like the Chinese community in Kolkata. So it's that's why Ru finds this kind of kinship with his neighbor, who is Chinese Indian. So yeah, that was definitely, it's very much a book also about prejudice and about bigotry, essentially, and living in a world where that is normalized, where these structures of power are constantly trying to get in the way of life and beauty. And it's about essentially a young person who doesn't know how to live in a world like that. And at some point we're all like that, because how do you live in a world that is spiraling constantly and this kind of self-destructive cycle? Does that answer your question? It's a good question. Yeah.
It does. It does, thanks. I'm going to Himanjali again. The practitioners of this genre, they've crafted some really spine-chilling horror, really effective for the genre. And I think you talked Edgar Allan Poe, but there are a whole lot. I mean, why do we leave out, starting right from Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, Shirley, what's her name? Yeah, Jackson, that's right. And of course, you have today's Stephen King. You can see I'm not really into the genre, but Tremblay, so totally. A lot of them. Yeah. And what is fascinating is the psychology of horror. Yeah. And that is something that is so evident in your book. Yeah. There is this girl, there are these two women, this man, so Akshar, Ahana, what's her name? Shalini. Yeah, Shalini. You forgot the name. Yeah. The mother of Akshar. They play out a sort of macabre dance of destruction that is fascinating, at times revolting, but always gripping. Yeah. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think horror, even, I have to say, when I was writing, I was just writing, but one does know, like, if I think of it, all the tropes that are supposed to be there in horror. Like there is a mansion, which is a dilapidated mansion, which has captures a sense of almost like a character, which has a decaying and kind of menacing. So that's there. And honestly, when I was writing, I don't think I did start it as a rewriting of House of Usher, but then it grew out of its, it grew in many directions. And House of Usher is a short story. And this was a novel. So after a point, just the seed of that short story remained. But I think, as it is, the tropes all are there. So, like Lovecraft, who's one of the, like a well-known practitioner of horror, he's wrote this essay on I think it was on the supernatural, where he says that the strongest and oldest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest fear is of the unknown. And that is what horror basically does. Yeah. It goes into this place of the unknown, and then, of course, you have, so fear, the unknown, this mansion, then characters who are also living on the brink, who seem to have some connection with another world. So these are the tropes of horror, but I think, again, what happens with horror is also it sounds like a genre that's alienating, but it's not in the sense that like any other genre, it is about the human mind. It is about the human mind being in a certain state of crisis, and it is about all the, the usual things of where there's love, loss, longing, motherhood, everything comes into play. It's how you do it. In a horror, you're treating it a little differently, perhaps from other genres.
You're taking people out of their comfort zone, basically.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And I think if you think of it, all literature is in some ways, that's what it does. It is about, because we all know the binaries of whether it's victim, villain, or good, bad. And of course, all of it is important for, say, for policing society, or for bringing up children and all of that. But I think the idea of literature is to sort of problematize these binaries, to take you also out of your comfort zone. Sort of, very commonly, all of literature across genres deals with transgression, with issues which are making people a little uncomfortable, take you out of your sort of comfort zone.
Absolutely. Okay, Hemangini, you share with Ollie, one of your leads, a remarkable, highly advanced sense of smell. And you've used that really interestingly here to create suspense, to build up an atmosphere of constant expectancy. The smells are associated with people, with situations that they're coming from. Tell us about that, because that's a really unique feature.
Sure. So the condition that I have, and perhaps not to the extent that my lead protagonist, Olympia Chatterjee, or Ollie, as she is known to her family, the dark nums, we all know about the Bengali dark nums. So Ollie has a much exaggerated condition. For me, this has been my lens on life for the longest time, I think since my teenage years. And, of course, in my teenage years, I wasn't aware that it was related to my condition. So I suffered from PCOS, which was diagnosed fairly late as well. And, this is one of the lesser known symptoms, that you are, I'm making fun of it. I know there are others who suffer a lot of it, but I often tell people I feel a little like a werewolf, because at certain times, I have heightened smell. I also have things like light sensitivity. So it's my husband and I often joke, are you turning into a supernatural creature of some sort, because you have all these special powers? And Ollie has this. And I thought, actually, why don't we make it a superpower? Why don't we, put a twist in this, make it a flex? And why don't we have someone who can use her sense of smell to actually pick up clues and solve crimes? And, the sense of smell is so powerful. As you said, you can create suspense. And it's both left brain and right brain, because when you smell something, you're also triggering memories. So like the Proustian Madeleine, the concept of, going back to a place, there's nostalgia, there's deep emotion, which could be pleasant or unpleasant. It could be terror, it could be safety, it could be anything. And on the other hand, you have this what I wanted to bring to this book, this very investigative process of who was in this room. Why do I smell cigarette ash or cigar ash here? Why do I smell this particular perfume? And this information can also strike terror into your heart, because there's different kinds of fear. We talked about, the most primal fear.
Reassure or terrorize.
Or terrorize. You might say like there are parts where she experiences, the term is phantom smells, where you don't know what it is, but you can smell something all the time. And, that becomes an element of it. And the word is actually phantom smell, so very on theme. And there's the other part where it is like somebody you know very well is lying to you. And you know this because you can smell it. So there are these two elements of it.
Yeah. Really interesting. That's part of this Scratch and Sniff Chronicles. Okay, Indra, I'm going to call them the dragon writers, so to speak. You know, people who write about the supernatural. Who did you read? Who were you influenced by? Especially the dragon writers like Paulini, Funke, supernatural writers like Borges. So, who had an influence on you? Who did you like reading?
That's always a very difficult question to answer because it's everything. Everything influences me, and there's just so much incredible art. But you mentioned Borges, and Borges was absolutely instrumental to my creative development. And as what speaking of dragons, I think this book doesn't explicitly take from very many books about the characters in the book.
But it's there. It's
very
the germ of
yeah.
that fantasy.
It starts with a little fragment from Le Guin's Earthsea novels, which I actually read quite late in life. I didn't read them as a child, so I wasn't influenced by them back then. But Le Guin has, again, been such a potent voice for me to always come back to when I'm writing. And I think Le Guin's portrayal of dragons is among the most beautiful that I've ever experienced. Like she treats them with such kind of dignity that they truly feel like deities, living deities, and that's what I wanted them to feel like in this book as well. They're not really in the center of the book at all. They're always on the margins, as if they barely exist, which is true of the people in the book. The family is from a people that doesn't exist on this world, and so they're kind of vanishing. And Le Guin was another huge influence. Of course, the characters in the book are obsessed with the Lord of the Rings, which was again massive influence for me as well as a child, including movies. But of course, The Lord of the Rings doesn't really have dragons too often. There's the Smaug in The Hobbit. But yeah, I mean, the dragons are, of course, not the primary point of the book. They're kind of part of the entire fabric of it. But there's another book, The Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson, which is a novel in verse, and that I think is also was a book that I thought of often while writing both this and The Devourers, because it's kind of takes myth and grounds it in a really intimate way, while also focusing on language and how important language is for myth. And she plays with language a lot, and it's such a beautiful book. I strongly recommend it, Anne Carson's work. So yeah, I think those were some of the key influences that I can. But there was so many, and I'm forgetting many, I'm sure.
Okay, thanks, Indra. Himanjali, in your cast of characters, do you have someone that you're fascinated by? Because they're all really complex. There are many layers to their consciousness, to who they are. Who are you fascinated by? And I also wanted to ask you that at the end of the day, finally, is it about reconciliation and new hope?
Yeah, I think the second part first. All of literature, I think it is about ultimately there should be, I feel, some amount of hope, however despairing our lives can be. And I think this book also, since it was especially writing during COVID, when all the systems, all the structures as we know it were breaking down. I mean, they still are in many ways, but even family, even the economy, so all that we grow up believing in, all the social systems, when they start breaking down, there's a sense of despair, there's a sense of not being able to cope, which is, I think, what I capture in this book. Because I was also writing at that point in time, when all of us were sort of stuck inside our houses. So it was a peculiar sense of isolation, because you are with your family, yet there is this whole sense of being completely disoriented because you don't know what's outside. And I think that's where that's the place from which I was writing. And so this book also became, I think, very different from maybe what I even intended. But at the end, it's not, I can't get myself to end on a note which is completely everything falling apart. So I think there's a tendency to hold out some hope that there has to be some, otherwise our life becomes too meaningless. And I think I couldn't do that. And what was the first part? I forgot
Which
now.
of the
Oh,
characters
characters. Yeah, so it's again like, I suppose, like you can't pick your favorite book or pick your favorite child, but I am fascinated with the characters in different ways. So like this Vasundhara, who
Yeah.
I think she's a parent, and she's very like I think the idea was to take motherhood and turn it a little on its head, because motherhood is something I think I find it very fascinating the way we all, and I think there are mothers in this book. Motherhood is a theme that runs through it, because it's something that's very often like women are expected, and motherhood is put on a pedestal, and women are expected to be naturally so good at mothering, and that's always bothers me, that that expectation from a woman. And so I just wanted to turn that around on its head, and it's like she cares for her child, but there are certain things she's not being able to do, which leads to, again, situation going out of hand in some ways, which is what I'm capturing here. And I think there are, like, for this, I think there are books like Lionel Shriver's, which was, shall we talk? No, what was it about Kevin? I forget. We need to talk about Kevin, which is about an extreme form. Like, that book really kind of got me thinking about how we treat motherhood. And there have been other books. I mean, there's Adolescence also, if anyone's watched the mini series, which kind of breaks down all the binaries we know about
What makes
parenting,
him
all
do
of
what
that.
he does and-
So, yeah, I think that's where, so that way, Vasundhara, yes. I do have a character, there's a woman with Alzheimer's, and
Yes.
that's slightly a personal story, because my mother has Alzheimer's, so that's something that does, like, I do think about it a lot, so about the human mind breaking down. And I think, I do like to, the idea of having 3 or 4 main voices is that I do like to have many points of view which play against each other. So, because then otherwise, so you don't have, and I think that happens even when we are talking, all of us are coming from, it's always very difficult to know exactly what the other person means. And exactly when I'm talking, how you are receiving it will be different from how someone else is receiving it. So that whole one single incident, there can be so many ways of interpreting it, and that's what makes it fascinating, which is why I think I like to have multiple points of view which play against each other, saying something a little different, and which kind of makes it more complex.
Absolutely. In fact, Vasundhara, as you quite rightly pointed out, we have these stereotypical images of motherhood, that no matter what, you sacrifice, you go along with what she does. Now, she did try and get out of that situation to do what is good for the child, but also give herself space. But when her daughter needed her, she rushed, she was there. So that instinct cannot be stilled. It's there. And also, you said earlier that there are some situations, I also commented, the ends aren't always tied up. There are mysterious situations. For example, the brother, Sahil, I think his name was, never quite explained why he is the way he is. And that's part of the mystery. It adds to it. You know, the incident with the dog. What was his role? What happened? So those are interesting, and you keep thinking, you keep looking for reasons or pointers, which again is fascinating. Okay, Hemangini. You know, I have an age problem, so this Himanjali and Hemangini is really getting to me. So-
Permitted. You can use us interchangeably.
Okay, Hemangini. Who out of all the writers of supernatural in the world, not just here, have you been influenced by? Who are your influences when you work on this show?
Sure. So I really like this question. So my formative influences, of course, I grew up in a household where there were various cultural influences. So in a Bengali household, when you're very young, you're watching your Gupi Gain, Baga Bain. So you have the idea of this benevolent ghost who you see in a certain way. Then I was also introduced to Monihara, so Tagore's Monihara. So this fascinated me, and it's actually made its way, in a way, in a little incident in my book as well. This idea of a woman being so deeply attached to her jewels that that she would like to linger. So there's, I mean, it's of course, my book is very campy and there's a funny take on it. And there's a point where, you know, they think one of their relatives is haunting them, and the aunt goes, it's okay, it's only this, my Mashi who's back because I'm wearing her bracelet, and her Cora actually, and you know, she's back because she was very attached to it, and she'd actually died on the four-poster bed that we are sleeping on at the moment. And then the other protagonist is deeply horrified, and you know, there's this whole scene. But this was inspired by, you know, this childhood memory of watching this beautiful film made by Satyajit Ray. And so there was that happening. There are Western influences, of course. So you know, we've already talked about Macbeth, for example, but like your Shakespearean ghosts kind of coming back to ask for revenge, ask for, you know, an explanation. And that is definitely a theme in the book. So there is a point, there's a very catalytic discovery of a skeleton which throws everything into motion. And just like, you know, the Shakespearean ghosts kind of saying it's a mix of, it's revenge, we're asking for revenge, and we're also, you know, there's a thread of guilt. And so these elements, these are the Western and, you know, some of those more cultural ones. But I cannot end this question without mentioning that there was a secret life I had where I was indiscriminately watching a lot of television, not wholly inappropriate content. So, you know, there are, whether it was, you know, flesh-eating zombies, this was my late-night television after my parents were asleep and I would crawl out of bed. So there were late night, you know, there were flesh-eating zombies, really terrible vampire movies, absolutely, and these remain my guilty pleasure. So I will make myself a bowl of Maggie and watch this whenever I'm having a bad
Very
day.
scary. She doesn't look like it.
And delight in sometimes how terrible these films are. So that is always going to be a part of my aesthetic as well when I write, because there will be this campy side, this side that really enjoys this. So these are the very eclectic mixes that went into the book.
Okay. Lovely. Indra, there seems to be a lot of food in your book. You keep coming back to that, and I'm sure that was intentional. So would you like to talk to us about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So again, you know, in our country, food is extremely political. Well, everywhere really, because it's such an essential part of. It kind of ties together cultures, and it's also an act of sharing. And but you know, the focus on food was very much influenced by anime. That was also, you know, the previous question. Yeah. That was actually quite a massive influence on this particular book, because I did want to kind of write a literary version of a Studio Ghibli movie, you know, like Spirited Away, etc. These were all very formative films for me. Especially Isao Takahata's The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, which is an absolutely gorgeous movie about adapting a folkloric story about this princess from the moon who is found and adopted by a human couple, and then she has to go back to the moon. And it's absolutely heart-wrenching. It's such a gorgeous and heartbreaking movie. And that was one of the movies that I really wanted to kind of capture the essence of. But you know, in anime, they really put a lot of focus on food and, you know, on portraying food as this kind of communal activity, and even the preparation of it, and kind of the use of resources to make the food. And it's so lovingly kind of animated and portrayed in these films. And I wanted to kind of, again, do the literary version of that, and also to kind of imagine what the cuisine of an extra-dimensional kind of diaspora would be like on planet Earth, within Calcutta, taking the influences of Calcuttan cuisine as well. You know, because Calcuttan Chinese food is such a unique cuisine and so beloved, and it is, and it's such a beautiful act of syncretism. You know, it's like it is combining cultural elements from so many different places. So again, I wanted to kind of do that for an imaginary culture, you know, which is why I focus so much on, and I also wanted to portray their relationship, this culture's relationship with dragons, as something they both consume and respect, you know, which is something that indigenous cultures have done for a long time, you know. meat eating in this country has a stigma attached to it, a very deep
Yeah,
stigma.
but why?
Uh,
I mean, even in our ancient texts,
Absolutely,
if you
absolutely.
read those,
Yeah.
and
So
Brahmins ate meat.
absolutely, yeah. And so, uh, what was I saying before that? uh,
Sorry.
no, no, it's because it's such a it's not a pleasant topic to think about. But yeah, so I wanted to portray this kind of indigenous connection to an almost animistic connection to nature, and respecting it while also using it to survive, because meat eating has not just in this country, but it has a negative stigma also because of the means of production in a capitalistic society. We have these horrific kind of mass industrialized death machines for these animals who are tortured and kind of shoveled into these factories and slaughtered. So that is, and it's also very unsustainable, the industrial practice of producing meat. So I wanted to kind of show a different type of cultural approach to eating meat, the indigenous cultural approach to eating meat, which, I often think about Western vegan culture, it often criticizes indigenous peoples in the Arctic, in North America, and in Greenland for eating whale meat. But, this is again born of scarcity. This is, they've managed to do that sustainably for centuries, and it's coming from a place of privilege that Western people can say, why are you eating seals? Why are you eating whales? It's not indigenous cultures who have wiped, who are making them go extinct. It's again capitalistic, industrialized societies. So yeah, that's all of those were reasons that I wanted to kind of put food at the forefront of the book.
Absolutely. And I'd just like to take that a little further, comment on it. At one time, people in Africa, they hunted only to eat, to survive. Today, people are paying big money to go and hunt there. But it is a rule in South Africa, at least, I don't know about Kenya, that you have to eat what you hunt. You have to eat it. Otherwise, you're not permitted to do that. So I think that's an excellent way of understanding that hunting just, for the sake of it is not on, and it comes from a place where people used to do it out of necessity at one time, to understand the seriousness of that. And still do, absolutely. Okay. Himanjali, you also write children's books, right? So tell us a bit about that. How does that, how do you balance the two? And essentially, I'm asking you about the writing process. What kind of mood do you need to get yourself into? Does it come naturally? How do you choose what you're going to write?
Yeah, I think what I write does depend on the mood at that moment for me. And I have, of course, my children's books it's what I wrote first were children's books. And my first, one of my books is about a super dog, which was based on my dog, really. Rousseau, who was a kind of crazy dog. So I think it is about what occupies your mind space a lot. So at that time when Rousseau was small, even my kids were small then. So it was just that I think that kind of stimulated my mind in a certain way, which made me write. And that time I was sort of also reading a lot of Roald Dahl, and all of those books were what my kids were reading, I was tending to read. So that's kind of mundane, but that's really the reason why I started writing children's books. There's a lot of Indian children's writers, like Anushka Ravi Shankar, Asha Nehmaya, who I really loved. Those are like slightly whimsical writing. So I like to, my children's books have more, I think, much more fun in them than my adults' books, because that's the whole, for me, I think childhood is about being a little more, have whimsy, basically. And like being slightly sort of goofy and all of that, which is what my children's books capture. And it's not like I've written, I did write 3 or 4 children's books. I've written young adult, which is also very different from the middle grade children's books. So the genres have all been very different. So young adult, in fact, I would say it's very different from, it's closer to adults literature maybe than to middle grade children's books, because it's a sort of, it can again be a slightly darker zone because it can be social issues, which is what I've done in my young adult books. So yeah, I think it's just like, as I said, burnings happened during COVID. My Mrs. C remembers was when I was kind of dealing with certain issues in my family, in my personal life. So books do, I think for everyone, it does come out of where you are in your life at that point. But it does, but of course there's sometimes a slightly more academic interest, like even Burnings is my interest in horror, which got reflected. So yeah, I think there is no process. I can't really say there's a process. It is about, I can't say what will be my next book. It will depend on circumstances, on what I'm doing at that point.
Okay. And where you get your ideas from, etc. Okay. Hemangini. You know, we've talked about a lot of writers of horror. We've talked about Poe and Tremblay and others. But what about the writers who were mainstream writers, but who had elements of the supernatural? Conan Doyle, for example. Would you like to comment on those? Because that's a whole different world, and that is a fascinating world.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, so classic crime fiction, golden age crime fiction, I think, absolutely favorite genres, I think, among many of us. I think the names you mentioned, whether it's Christie, Conan Doyle, loved, much loved by all of us. And what's really interesting is a lot of us who write sort of in the genre, like for me, my book is sort of mixed genre. There are gothic elements, but it is essentially crime. It is essentially a murder mystery. And so there are deep influences from that period. And what's really interesting is if you look at the time period that golden age crime fiction and classic crime fiction came about, especially the period which was post-World War. So something very interesting that was happening was, of course, you know, all our books are a little bit of a reflection of the market at that time and what, you know, what people are feeling. And a lot of people were feeling very lost. Some people had loved ones who they had lost, and they, you know, they couldn't reconcile with the fact that they hadn't actually found out what had happened to them. And this led to a culture, a really massive culture of seances and clubs where people would try to get in touch with the dead. And so this obviously something that was happening as a phenomenon, you know, in the post-World War period did reflect in the literature as well. And both, I think, Conan Doyle and Christie had, well, they had slightly different approaches to it. Christie, in many of her novels, you know, I'm sure there are fans in the audience, you will recognize that there are elements like Poirot will use a seance as a device to trap, you know, to trap someone and kind of get a confession out. Or, you know, in the Sitterford mystery, it's kind of sets off as a cue. You know, there's a sense of foreboding. And, you know, these are much loved novels. And what Christie did for the most part, except in her early phase, was these were seemingly paranormal, you know, making that distinction. These were because when you're having an investigative process, this is to create atmosphere. This is to, you know, create suspense, but often the reveal would be kind of different. And in real life also, it was sort of, you know, there were early years which she did write about things which were, you know, things were left unexplained, which was paranormal. But then Conan Doyle, interestingly, you know, he actually started this whole movement where he wanted to bring science to kind of understand the paranormal. So he set up societies, you know, very significant people were members. There were physicists who were involved in this, who said, you know, we're in this time frame where there's so much unknown, we've lost so many people. What if there's a science to it? What if we can find out? So this has always been very fascinating to me because, you know, even Conan Doyle in The Hound of Baskervilles, you know, when we know of that, that was, of course, seemingly paranormal, right? But there was a step where in their real lives, you know, it became a quest. It became a quest to find out scientifically what's really happening, right? So this was very interesting. One really quick factoid before I kind of pass off to the others as well is, I don't know if some of you know, Christie disappeared. There was a famous Christie disappearance, right?
That was when her marital trouble
she was having marital troubles and she disappeared, and to this day, nobody can really confirm what happened. And at that point, Conan Doyle had tried to do like a seance to access her, to kind of see if she was alive and, you know, that sort of thing. So these worlds did kind of cross over into their reality as well. So, I mean, they are intertwined, but yeah, that's my bit on it.
Lovely. Okay, we just have 1 minute, but I really want to ask you all this, starting with Himanjali. You know, friendship in different ways is a strong factor in these books. So just a couple of lines about the friendship between Shalini and Akshar.
Yeah, I think again, friendship is such something we don't talk about in the same way we talk about family, but it's just so important, and how it forms all our lives, and and it's also because it lies slightly outside the boundaries of like expectations as in other relationships. So you can take it in any direction you want, and it can. So I think that's where Akshar and Shalini come in. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, for you, Laura and Ollie, there's a sentence that the man in her life says when Laura is trying to put him off and say, he says, no one in my family would try and let down any of my girlfriends as gently as you're doing for your sister. So.
Yes, so that's such a lovely line to pick up. Thank you so much.
It really stuck in my head.
And it really reflects the gentleness and, well, the equation between these two. And just a really quick the warmth between their relationship. So Elora or Laura Chatterjee is the older sister in this, in this kind of unusual family unit. And Ollie is the younger sister. Elora is actually joined their home as their domestic help and was adopted by Ollie's aunt, and soon became she was a seamless member of the family, okay? And in fact, she became the bossy older sister in a way. And what was really lovely was this equation where she came in, and it wasn't a sense of obligation. She immediately took on Ollie under her wing because they had very different personalities. Laura being, assertive, kind of being somebody who can do confrontations, that being this driven go-getter, and Ollie just being a little more vulnerable. So that's why when her prospective love interest, and she kind of doesn't want to see him anymore, and she actually tells Aura, but you're so good and terrifyingly good at having confrontations, can't you just tell him, can you please get rid of him for me? I don't need this in my life right now, I'm going off.
Okay. And I'm going to butt in, sorry.
Yes.
Two sentences, Alice and Rue, because that's very unusual, that friendship. It's like almost a reclamation for both of them.
Yeah, so I wanted to portray a relationship between someone who is perceived as masculine, who has a loving and very strong bond with a woman, a young woman, and they're both queer, and they both don't know it, and they kind of find that out together in a sense. But it's not just that, of course. But that was something I really wanted very much to portray.
Okay, and maybe I'll put a final word to it. Maybe there's a certain comfort level to that also. When you know that the expectations are not of anything other than pure friendship. So thank you so much, Himanjali. I'm just going to hold these books up again. And all of you, any of you who are into these genres, do please buy these books. They were absolutely fascinating in their own way. This one's Hemangini, The Scratch and Sniff Chronicles, The Burnings by Himanjali Sankar, and The Last Dragoners of Beaubazar by Indra. Thank you so much. It's been a fascinating read for me, fascinating session for me. I hope for all of you, thank you for being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Oh, group photo, okay. And I'm so sorry we didn't have time for audience questions.
Please observe the dog at the back. It's very cute.
Ladies and gentlemen, please have a huge round of applause for our speakers. Thank you. On that note, let us thank the festival partners, Goethe Institute, Institute Francis, alias Fawcett du Bengal, Antonym Collections, Glenburn Penthouse, Sunrise Pure, refreshment partner Cha Bar and Cafe Kotum, gifting partner Fluris, hospitality partner Kenilworth Hotel, The Park, Kolkata, radio partner 91.9 Friends FM, institutional partner Teachers Center and the Heritage College, outdoor media partner Balaji Ads, event partner Navpreet and Levin Events. Ladies and gentlemen, Sunrise Pure is our festival partner, and they have set up a stall right here at the venue. They have released 2 new masalas, the peri peri masala and the Chinese fried rice masala. They are sending out free sampling, so if you're interested, please visit their stall and collect the free samples. They also have a booklet of Durga Puja and its stories, 250 stories across Bengal. It is also available at the stall. You may go and check out the sample, scan the QR and download the PDF for free. Thank you.